and then in Bangalore to being back here. Now they travel as itinerant missionaries back and forth to India. And I asked Rick to come and share this morning first about their work in India so that it would inspire us, because we're all called to be world changers wherever God has us, and then to speak to us. And I'm thinking God is going to give us a fresh commission for the ministry that he has for all of us. But would you welcome Rick as he comes to teach?
Thank you. Good morning. Let me get situated here. There we go. Sorry, the pictures, I've got some pictures I thought I'd show you, but they may be a little too dark to actually see some details. But as Rand mentioned, my name's Rick Coffin, and my wife Ellen's not able to be here today. Our son and my daughter-in-law are expecting a baby in a few weeks. And so my wife's there in Washington, D.C. for the weekend. But it's great to be here. And as Rand mentioned, I want to just start by sharing with you a little bit about our involvement in India, because this has become our home church now. And so it means a lot to us to be here. And already we're starting to meet many of you. And our desire is to partner with you in the work that we're doing. So we really want to ask for your prayer. And so we thought you would enjoy understanding a little bit of what we do. So Ellen and I went to Bible college together. And while we were at Bible college, God started to speak to us about the nations and about becoming missionaries. It's totally unexpected, didn't really see that coming, but God captured our hearts. And so we started praying about, well, where should we get involved? And as we prayed about that, we started meeting some people from India. Actually, an Indian leader at a Bible college in India moved in right next door to us. And one of the first things he did was he came over to our house and knocked on the door. And, here's this older Indian couple standing at our door. And the wife is in a sari and the husband's wearing Indian clothes. And they're holding a bowl of popcorn. And, this is kind of a strange sight, right? So we answered the door. And here's this couple. And they said hi. And we said, oh, please, we knew you moved in next door. Please come in. So they came in and sat down. And he set down the bowl of popcorn. And he said, I have a very important question. Oh, what is that? He said, well, we were told before we came to the United States that... Oh, am I doing something wrong? We were told before we came to the United States that you Americans eat everything with a knife and a fork. But we can't figure out how to eat the popcorn that way. And then he got kind of this silly grin on his face. Should I switch over? There we go. Let me turn this. Oop. There we go. Turn that off. Switch to this. Is it on? All right. There we go. Sorry about that. And then he got this kind of silly grin on his face, and we realized he was joking. I was like, oh, so it was kind of funny. But that was our first introduction to meeting somebody from India. And over the next few months, they introduced us to other Indian friends, and God began to capture our heart for India. A few months later, we had an opportunity to go to India, and we were just 20 years old at the time, and we were overwhelmed. If you haven't been to India or any place like that, particularly India, it is sensory overload. You're just bombarded by different sights and smells and sounds and just so many things that we had never experienced before. But we fell in love with the people of India. And as the end of our trip there to India came after about 6 weeks, we started praying, Lord, what's next? And one of the things that we both agreed at that time was, this isn't the right time. We're not ready. Because we were overwhelmed, and we thought, we're so young, we need to get some more education. And, at that point, I think what we were thinking was, we'll go back, we'll go to seminary, and then we'll be ready for India. As it turned out, it was another 17 years before God spoke to us that it was time to start going back to India. I had been a pastor at a local vineyard in Atlanta for a number of years, and God opened up the opportunity to start traveling to India. And for 9 years, we would go to India, weeks at a time, something like that, sometimes twice a year, and visit different vineyards and do teaching and training, that sort of thing. It was a great experience. I started to think, every time I'd go on a trip, I'm like, now are you calling us to India? But it just never seemed like the right time. It didn't seem like what God was doing. And after a while, I started getting to this point where I thought, well, maybe that's just not the type of missionary God's calling us to be. And so we kind of started into this routine of pastoring a local church, local vineyard, and participating in the India Partnership and traveling to India once or twice a year. But in 2004, I had a dream. And in that dream, God started speaking to me, or God made it very clear that he was giving me faith. When I woke up from the dream, it was one of those dreams that you just can't get out of your mind. It was so clear. And I knew God was giving me faith. I just didn't know, okay, what is the faith for? At the time, our church was meeting in a rented facility, and people started to talk about the possibility of buying a building. And in fact, somebody had contacted us, a realtor, and said that they had a building. So my first thought was, well, Lord, I'm not really looking forward to the prospect of raising funds to purchase a building. But if that's what you're calling us to, okay, if you're giving me faith for that, I'll do it. Just let me know. And then as clear as I've ever heard God say anything, God said, is that what I called you to? And it just knocked the wind out of me. I said, God, I'm 49 years old. You want me to go to India now? That was my first thought. My second thought was, Lord, you're going to have to tell Ellen. If this is really what you're calling us to do, you need to speak to her. And so I went and shared the dream and talked to Ellen about it. And she said, I think this really is the Lord. So then we went and talked to our kids, and we had our daughter was just entering graduate school, and our son was just entering college. And as we talked to them, they both said, yeah, Dad, that's what you've always wanted to do. Sorry. That's what you've always wanted to do. So you should go. And so in 2005, Ellen and I moved to Delhi, India. Now, Delhi, if most of you have probably never been there, Delhi's not a very easy city to live in. There's about 20 million people that are crowded in an area that's much smaller than should have 20 million people. And it's very harsh weather-wise. There's a lot of poverty. About 1/4 of the city is at a slum level or below. Many of them are homeless. So it's a very challenging place to live. But the vineyard had 2 young leaders that they sent to us from some of the other vineyards in India. And they moved in with us, these two young guys, and that was quite a cultural experience. And kind of funny thing, just a little side note, here we are in this house, and it was actually a joint family house is how it was designed. So in the middle of the house, you could look down over the edge, and the family that lived below was right there. And you could look up, and there was another family there. So, you had the rooms around, but you had this almost like not a courtyard, but a small area in between. And so we were surrounded by Indians, and it was a cultural, very cultural experience. And one interesting thing, these two young guys, we had those two, and then we were very close with a family downstairs, and we would often eat with them. And none of them made chai the same. None of them. So Ellen would make chai as the Indian name for tea, and they would make milk tea. But they all had a different little formula for it. And so that was kind of our introduction to the diversity of India. India is extremely diverse. Diverse languages, ethnic background, and different tribes, different castes, of course, different economies. And they're all separated by all these different distinctions. Each state has not only its own language, but many sub-languages. And so we were pretty overwhelmed by our experience in Delhi, but God allowed us, working with these two guys, to gather a group of people. And this is one of our worship services, and it was just an incredible time. We had a great experience in Delhi. But after 5 years, God spoke to us that it was time to turn that over to a pastor, an Indian pastor. And we had a friend that had moved into the south side of Delhi. We were on the north side of Delhi, and their church was about 1 year old and just getting started. And so we approached him and said, look, you're meeting on the south side in the morning, and our service is in the north side in the evening. Would you be open to pastoring both congregations? And so his name is Emmanuel. Emmanuel agreed to that. And in 2010, we turned our church over to Emmanuel. And for the next year, he would drive an hour to the north side on Sunday evening and pastor this group. And then after a year, he put those two together in what's called the Vineyard, Aradhana worship. And that church is still meeting today and doing really well. But after those 5 years in Delhi, we felt like it was important for us to maybe get a business visa. So we got a business visa, and we started praying about who we could help of the different vineyard pastors in India. And we had a friend in Bangalore, and his church was about a year old, but it was really struggling and a lot of challenges. And so we decided, why don't we move, we'll get the business visa, and we'll start an English institute in Bangalore, and while we're there in Bangalore, we'll help in this local vineyard. So we moved back to the United States, got our business visa, made all the arrangements, raised support to move our family, move all our belongings from North India to South India. Completely different culture, by the way. And when we got different from Delhi, I mean, not just different from us, but different from Delhi. And we moved to Bangalore. And the week we got there, we found out that the week before, they had decided to close the church. Like, you know, and that's one of the things about India. Those of you that have visited India, you always go with plan A, but you have to have plan B, plan C, plan D. And oftentimes it goes further down the alphabet. So here we were in Bangalore, and we're ready to start this English Institute, and the church we were supposed to help has dismantled. So praying about it, we decided that, you know, what we probably should do, even though we had been thinking we wouldn't go to church, is maybe we should gather the people and we'll just get it started and kind of take care of it until our friend and his wife are ready to take it back over. So we started doing that. We gathered that original group of people, 8, 10 people, and then we contacted we had some other contacts that we were reaching out to, and so we launched a new church in Bangalore. New name, new location, all that kind of stuff. But Ellen and I kept meeting with this couple in the hopes that they would take over the church. after 6 months, it became clear that, to them and to us, that they were not going to come back and they were not going to pastor this church. So it ended up for 5 years that we pastored another church in India. And again, wonderful church. There's lots of things I could tell you about that church. It's full of excitement. In a few weeks, Ran and I are going to get to visit, and Ran will actually speak on Sunday morning at the Mercy Vineyard in Bangalore. And it's a very diverse church. In fact, when you go to India, one of the things that happens when you're out on the street is that you are confronted often with beggars. But there are different groups of beggars that have different characteristics. Well, one group of beggars are what are called eunuchs. And they're actually a part of a Hindu sect that are individuals that they're not literally eunuchs, but that's what they're referred to as. There's a Hindu name as well that they're referred to as. And they're mostly cross-dressers and often homosexual. And what we didn't realize is that they're not only out on the street begging, but they're also selling themselves for prostitution, male prostitution, in the evenings. And the week after we got there to start this new church, a young man showed up through a whole amazing set of circumstances. And he had contacted somebody, and he had gone actually to a conference, and somebody said, well, you need to get into a vineyard. He said, well, I don't know of any vineyard. And they said, well, here, contact this person. And they gave him my email address, not knowing that I had moved to Bangalore. And so Dish wrote to me on email and said, I'd like I'm interested in a vineyard. Are there any vineyards in Bangalore? So I wrote back and said, well, actually, I just moved to Bangalore, and we're in the process of planting a church. And he said, well, where do you live? And we lived 1 mile apart in the same part of Bangalore. And again, Bangalore's 13 million people, very spread out, very congested, and very difficult to get from one side to the other. But he only lived 1 mile away. So we met for lunch. And as we sat there for lunch, he said, Rick, he told me his whole story, his whole background. He said, I have a real heart for eunuchs. And I'm like, wow, that's an amazing ministry. That's really great that you have a heart for that. And he said, they're very vulnerable to suicide because of just how difficult their life is. And I have about 20 friends among the eunuchs, and can we bring them to your church? We hadn't even had one Sunday morning meeting yet. And in my mind, I'm just picturing our 6 or 7 kind of middle-class Indian, very traditional individuals mixed in with 20 eunuchs in our church. Like, okay, that's going to be a huge challenge. But I said, Jagdish, if you start coming and you share your heart for that group of people, I haven't even met the people that are going to be coming to our church. But I promise you this, if you come and you act with us, I'll do my best to teach people that we're to have a heart for everybody from every different background you can imagine, including these eunuchs. And then it's going to be a huge challenge. You know, the churches in India are not really open to having eunuchs come to the church. But if you come and they get to know you and you share your heart, I will do my best. And we'll start not with all 20. That would be a little overwhelming. We're going to need to just start maybe, why don't you start with just one individual that you feel like is the most open to the Lord and invite them to come to the church. And sure enough, over the next couple years, as you look at our congregation, you'll see a whole group of young adults, a number of different families, a few people from International Justice Mission there in Bangalore, and a group of eunuchs. So it was an amazing church. We had a wonderful time. And but after 5 years of doing that, in 2015, we needed to come back and renew our visa. And so we, let me move to this next slide, sorry. And so in 2005, we came back to the United States